Beautiful. I think we're all set. So again, for those of you who've just joined the call, please enter your name and your school in the chat box. We'll be using that throughout this conversation just to collect some additional questions towards the end, which Austin will answer. To give a little bit of an introduction, first to Modern Guild. Hopefully all of you know what Modern Guild does since you've all participated in one way or another, but we're not currently in kind of an active recruitment process. We will be beginning that again in January, but really the purpose of the calendar, which you were all shared on, and these events, of which this is going to be the kickoff, good to great, how to ace the consulting interview. The purpose behind these events is really just to create a more consistent and ongoing circulation of different kinds of educational events, both within specific industries like consulting and finance, which of course are the two that we currently focus on. But also more broadly, skills related to resume development and interviewing and networking and how to kind of both understand and communicate your story to other people. So you'll see all kinds of different events, both workshops, which this one will be mostly led by the speaker, as well as other ones which are, one-on-one and small group conversations. So definitely keep an eye out for those as we move through this semester, and then for sure starting again in January. But with that, without any more delay, we're really excited to have Austin Anderson on the call tonight. He's one of our oldest and most devoted mentors. He's worked with dozens of students through our consulting accelerator, since that's his background. He's a manager at EY, Ernst & Young, where he focuses primarily on strategy, process, and operations improvement, and also received his MBA from the Ross School of Business. So maybe that'll be something that somebody wants to ask about later on, although you guys are probably well away from thinking about MBA processes. But anyway, Austin's going to give kind of a nuanced overview of the consulting process and really some of the things that he's learned going through this with lots of different students and some things he's learned along the way. So with that, I will let Austin take it away. You're going to be seeing his screen throughout the call. One more logistical note, just as we move through, hopefully you all got the invitation to submit questions. I have the ones that you've submitted before we begin, and we'll be referring to those at the end of this when we do the Q&A. But if you have questions throughout the call, feel free to just put them in the chat box, and I will actually start with the ones that are entered here before going to the others. So we'll try and cover as many as we can, but we'll see how much time we're left with. We'll end around 10 o'clock, so keep that in mind. And that's it. Go ahead, Austin.
All right, thanks, Oliver. Yeah, so this is something I'm really passionate about. In addition to Modern Guild, I work with students from the University of Michigan in the consulting club. I interview for EY. I spend a lot of time on campus, and I'm really passionate about helping students, really understand the process and be successful through the process. So, I'm excited to be able to present this to you tonight. And one thing I'd like to clarify about this content is that it's really focused on individuals who have already started exploring both networking, fit interviews, and case interview to some degree. So this will not be an introduction to any of those topics. It will be taking you to the next level and thinking about some of the differentiators in each one of those areas. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump in. Let's see here. All right. So I don't mean to start on a challenging note here, but what if I told you that I knew within the first 5 minutes of interacting with folks who would get an offer? Would you believe me? I've spent so much time on campus that it really seems that just after a few interactions with someone, seeing, the way they respond to questions, their posture, just the way they really hold themselves and interact, that I feel like with a 90% probability, I can anticipate who's going to get an offer, right? Just based on who they are. And that seems kind of like a challenge, something that's really difficult to overcome. And really that's due to the unspoken influence of human nature, right? It's kind of sucks. It's not fair, but it's real, and it's something that we have to deal with. And part of what underlies that is, we like to interact with those who are like us. They talk like us. They're kind of similar. We kind of like the same things. We interact in the same way. We think the same types of things are funny. And what all of that boils down to is that, little things like appearance, tone, and style matter. And they matter more than they should relative to other factors like how well we answer questions, the experience on our resume, how good we are at the math components of cases, how logical and structured we are, right? So there's a lot of these little underlying factors that come into play a lot, okay? And then, what this boils down to is on campus, a lot of times, it's just a small subset of the same students getting all the offers from all the different companies, right? So how do we overcome this uphill battle that it seems like we're faced with, right? Well, the good news is there's hope, right? After all the different students I've seen a lot of folks kind of come a long way and make a lot of progress by thinking about this. So, you can't really change who you are, but there are some things that you can change. You can think about, your resume. It might not have all the beef that you want it to have, right? Maybe you don't have that large CPG firm or consulting firm on your resume, and sometimes it seems like a chicken or egg scenario where, how in the world can I get a job when I don't have great experience in the first place, right? Well, let me tell you, if you tell your story in a compelling and interesting way, you can really overcome the fact that, well, maybe you don't have that big name on your resume. Well, maybe you don't have, the most amazing undergrad degree. Maybe you chose one and kind of regretted and should have chose something more appealing to different companies. Well, you can't control that, but you can control the way you tell your story, right? In the fit interview, what I mean by that is really those questions where you talk about yourself, talk about your experience. It's not a case, it's more open-ended. And so that's your opportunity to make a real connection and have an engaging conversation, right? And a little point I have on here, the secret to the case interview is that it's about fit, right? So there's a little twist, and we'll kind of get to that a little bit later. All right, so no more doom and gloom. Let's go ahead and hop right in and start thinking about, well, how can I be the right fit? All right. So one of the first things you do is you build your resume. And so when you think about a resume, you have your education, you have your experience, right? What you've done, whether it's work or academic achievements. And then a lot of times there's space for additional sections, right? And I can tell you, after having scanned hundreds and hundreds of resumes, seen all the different experience that people have, a couple things usually tend to stand out, right? A couple of differentiators. And again, that's what we're talking about tonight. We're not talking about, how to make sure that you structure it well and have the right experience and structure each bullet so you have a, context, action, and result format, right? We're really talking about those little things that stand out that kind of give you an edge, right? At the end of the day, everybody's resume is going to look pretty good. But what's going to make yours stand out? So I'll tell you a couple things. So oftentimes there will be a section where you can talk about different interests or kind of different academic areas that you're interested in. So, if you're really interested in finance or strategy or maybe, human capital consulting or whatever area, it's good to get involved with a club and indicate that on there. Because I can tell you when I look through and I'm looking for people with strategy or healthcare experience or whatever, it's nice if they all have that experience, but show me in other dimensions how you're involved with that, how you're truly passionate about that area. And so that section, often up at the top, kind of right under your education where you're involved in different clubs, that's a good area to really think about what you're focused and interested in and have that stand out. Okay, that tells a bigger story than you think. And then there's an additional section at the bottom, right? A lot of times people put things down there like programming languages that they're proficient in or Six Sigma black belt or some other skill set. And I think that's good, right? Because those are really core skills. But let me tell you, when I'm sifting through hundreds of resumes, the ones that end up standing out are ones that also have something interesting that they like to do. And I don't just mean I like to eat expensive Italian food in New York. Okay, hey, that's pretty cool, but it's not really something exceptional about you. So tell me something unique, right? Have you climbed a mountain? Are you, starting up a new sport for the first time kind of later in your life? What is something that you're passionate about that you're getting involved with, right? Me, I was a children's ski instructor for 7 years. And what I found, both as an MBA candidate interviewing with companies, and trust me, I ended up at EY, but I interviewed at Deloitte, McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, PwC, right? Dozens. One of the things that I had the best conversations about in my interview and really connected with people on was this bottom section. So think about how to differentiate yourself down there with a couple of interesting things. And here's a final tip. Maybe you're a super athlete, right? You run marathons, you do triathlons, whatever. If that's the only dimension you have, that's good. I mean, it's good to highlight that, but it's nice to hit maybe 2 or 3 different dimensions just so that you have a higher chance of being able to connect with whoever it is that you're interviewing with, right? So maybe something about volunteering, athleticism, and some other hobby that you're passionate about, right? That kind of gives you something that increases your probability of being able to connect with whoever it is that's either scanning your resume or interviewing with you, all right? So that's the first part, right? That's the first pass. Here's a couple other things. So we're focused on the fit interview. Again, those are those open-ended questions, right? So let's say you've walked through your resume, you've talked through that. What are some other things to keep in mind during this conversation? Well, one is assess your interviewer. Maybe you got to meet him the night before, you've had some conversations with him, maybe not. But one of the key things is to try to understand what they're all about. You know, what's their interaction style? What are they kind of projecting outward to you? Try to read them and see, can you get a sense for the way that they like to interact, right? Maybe they're a little bit more direct and concise. Maybe they're a little bit more talkative. You know, maybe you know their background is a type of engineering, and so they're going to be a little more structured and mathematical and logical to the way they like to think about things, right? These are good ways to differentiate the way that you structure your responses, all right? Sometimes it's a little bit impossible. We're not all psychologists, but if you can do that, it really can put a nice edge on the way that you interact. The other I'd say is, at the end of the day, we do a lot of practicing. The best thing you can possibly do is to be genuine, all right? Because if you're faking it, it's usually going to come out, especially when you're nervous. So try to be genuine. You know, I tend to like someone, even if they're not really like me necessarily, if they kind of are unique, but if I can tell that they're genuine, if this is what they're really going to be like to work with, and I get a true sense for that, I would take that over somebody who maybe was a little bit more polished, but gave me the impression that, you know, there was a layer underneath that really didn't get exposed. The other thing I would say is try to be interesting, okay? Don't be flat. Try to have a little bit of fun in those interactions, okay? It's not like you're building a lifelong friendship in 30 or 45 minutes, but try to be interesting and have a little bit of fun, okay? You know, that doesn't mean you're telling jokes, but maybe you can, you know, have a couple laughs when you're interacting with them, right? And what that does is it brings some energy in. A lot of times people are interviewing back-to-back 10, 12 different people, right? They all have pretty good answers. What can you do to be interesting when you're interacting with somebody, okay? And then the final thing I'd say is ask good questions, right? And ask good questions has a few components. One is show that you're authentically interested in understanding what that interviewer is all about, okay? If you can understand what they do with that company and the types of projects they work on, the things that they actually like, ask them questions about that. And the key thing is to show authentic interest, right? Don't memorize something that came out in the Wall Street Journal about that company and ask a canned question. You know, that always kind of seems a little bit disingenuous, right? Or kind of silly. It's like, and half the time the interviewer is too busy to pay attention to that news and won't even know what you're talking about, right? So make sure it's something that you've learned. It shows that you're paying attention to them, that you actually care about them and their life, right? And so, you know, maybe they'll share something, they'll open up a little bit about the realities of their work, right? And then at the end of the day, they'll feel like they made a more authentic connection with you. All right. So enough about the fit interview for now. Let's talk a little bit about some of the nuances within kind of telling your story. And this is both kind of walking through your experience, but then also those fit interview questions such as, tell me about a time when you failed. Tell me about a time when you were on a team and a team member was not cooperating, right? These are the typical fit interview questions, right? And so one of the keys is making sure that you have maybe 5 or 6 different stories that you've memorized that you can work in to any type of question, right? So I think somebody is not on mute. So if everybody who's not presenting can hit mute, that would be great. So if you have these 5 or 6 questions, how can you rehearse them, but then not end up sounding rehearsed at the end of the day, right? That's the challenge. You really need to make sure, like, okay, Well, I scored the winning touchdown at a football game. That's one of my stories. In my summer internship, I solved some great operational problem that saved some money. There's another story at school. I was on a team, and this person never showed up to meetings. We had to cover for them, but we didn't want to throw them under the bus. That's another story, right? And you want to be able to apply these stories to different things, and you kind of rehearse it in your mind. Here's how it started. Here's what I did, and here's what the outcome was, right? Again, context, action, result. Well, how can you do that without sounding rehearsed? So that's something that you want to keep in mind, right? And I think that's one of the keys to that, is making sure that it's really a true and authentic story. And then you just make sure that you understand it inside and out, right? So that you're not trying to stop and think about which one to apply and how it fits in with that situation, okay? And the other thing you can do, right, is explain why, right? The real underlying key to these fit questions is that the interviewer is trying to understand, why do you act the way you act? Why do you make certain decisions, right? I'm asking these questions because I'm trying to put you in the job, right, and anticipate how you're going to react to future situations. So these are many simulations that I'm trying to do with you at the moment. And so that is, the key is making sure that you explain why. For example, if I said, tell me about a time where you had a difficult teammate, and you were telling your story, you'd say, well, the teammate never showed up to events. And so what I did was, the first thing I wanted to do was I wanted to interact with them one-on-one in a safe space without other people around. And the reason why I did that is I felt like it would be less confrontational and they would be more likely to open up than if I just exposed them in front of the rest of the group where they might shut down, right? If I leave out that why component, there's a lot less impact in the meeting to what I did, right? So that's a key thing. Always add the why component. I did this because I thought it would lead to this outcome, right? That's really a key thing. So try to work in that why to everything you do, even if the why isn't necessarily the right answer. A lot of times interviewers would rather take somebody who they understand how they think and they can anticipate how they're going to do something, rather than somebody who just stumbled upon the right answer and everything worked out, right? Well, I talked to the person and everything worked out. So there's my story. It's like, well, did you just randomly choose that approach, or did you choose it for a reason? Okay. And then you really want to make it easy to pick out the good parts of your story, right? And so what that means is you got to have a nice, clear flow, structure, and conclusion. Okay. So that's where, the context, action, results come in. And earlier on, I told you the key to the case is fit, weaving and fit. Well, guess what? The key to the fit interview in this conversation is weaving in structure, just like you would with a case, okay? And doing it in a way that doesn't sound rehearsed, right? And being really concise about it and impactful. If your story goes on really beyond 2 minutes, they're going to zone out. They're going to stop listening, especially in this age of Facebook and social media. Trust me, people are going to get really zoned out. So how can you be structured and concise and get to that conclusion? Here's the situation. It's faced with a student who wouldn't come to the meetings. Well, what I did was first, I talked to them one-on-one because I thought they'd open up. You know what? That actually didn't work. So I needed to escalate. I gave it my best shot. So I had the professor reach out to them, right? Asking them if they could make sure that they're getting involved, and that was important. You know what? That also didn't work out. And the reason I had them do that was because, they didn't respond to the first thing. And then the third thing I did was, I had all the teammates get together and, we invited them out for drinks, because we knew that was something that they like to do. And finally, that ended up working. And as a result, we had a great outcome, right? You got to make sure that it can flow from piece to piece to piece. You can see the progression throughout your answer and your story, and that, your conclusion really fits in with the actions that you took, right? So if it's not structured, if you're wandering around, it's not going to be impactful. And so you want it to be easy for them to remember those key points, what you did, right? And I would say one of the other key things is always think about the impact of what you did. If you're always saying, well, me and my team, we did this, and me and my team, we did that, and here's kind of what happened. Well, tell me what you did. What was your role in this whole situation? I need to know the impact that you had, right? Now, you don't want to sound like a know-it-all, or like you're more important than the other people. But you have to carefully craft your response in a way that makes it clear what your individual personal impact was, so they can have those notes and come away really understanding the type of person you are and the way you respond in these situations. Okay. Finally, this is one of my favorite new things, and we kind of opened up this conversation talking about purpose statements, right? It's something that EY is really big on nowadays. It's kind of picking up in the industry as a hot topic, right? Well, a lot of times we're practicing something called the Odyssey, right? That's your elevator pitch or your Odyssey. It's the tell me about yourself. What are you all about, right? And you usually weave in, where you go to school, your experience, and why you want to work at that company, right? There's a common structure for an Odyssey. Well, that's great. That's fine and good, and it's good to know those things and have that structured. One interesting trend I've seen, which is a differentiator for students, are those who come up with a purpose statement for themselves, right? What is your purpose in life, right? So at EY, I was interviewing with their healthcare and strategy group, right? So at one point I said, well, my purpose is to bring my operations background and my fresh set of eyes and bring more of a consumer focus to healthcare. Because you know what? I'm tired of going to the hospital and getting a bill from my doctor, a separate bill from my insurance, a separate bill from the radiologist, having none of them communicate with each other, having no choice in the whole process, and then not really understanding how it all pieces together. And you know what? I want to solve situations just like that when I come to EY. That type of story is so much more powerful than just going through your background and your resume in a static fashion, right? So think about, is there a way to tell a compelling purpose statement about those problems that you want to solve, those things you're passionate about, and really your why? Like, why do you exist, right? What are the things that you really care about that you want to solve in the future? And then they want you to be a part of the company. Like, man, this person's incredible. I want them to be here, and I want to watch them solve these problems and tackle these things that they're really passionate about. I want to see them grow into that person who they're envisioning for themselves, okay? So all I'd say is that Odyssey, that purpose statement, those things are way more important than you think. If it's overly rehearsed, if it's not dynamic, if it's flat, that's really your opening statement. If you start out kind of flat, you have a bit of an uphill battle to come back from that, okay? So really try to get that type of thing right and think about ways that you can really differentiate that and draw them in, right? You see, I have these icons with microphones and acting and sad faces. And kind of back to my original point, a lot of this is a little bit about acting, right? You really need to kind of think about those skills, about how to truly connect with people, draw them in, get them emotionally invested in you, in your story, okay? All right. No, this is one thing a lot of people are interested in who are interested in consulting. The business case interview can be pretty intimidating, right? And there's a lot of books out there, Victor Cheng's book, Case Interview Secrets, and dozens of others, right? And I've read a few of them at different points in time. I've, given lots of cases, done lots of cases myself. And so these are really the nuggets of gold that I think will help you to differentiate your case interview from other people, okay? At the end of the day, people going into consulting who are really passionate about it, they're going to do 15, 20, maybe 50 cases, right? By the time they're done with this process, they'll do a lot of practice. And so a lot of the baseline understanding about case interviews are going to be table stakes. That just means everyone's going to be pretty good. So how are you going to be excellent in the case interview? All right. Let me give you some ideas. So a few of my buddies, we came up with this concept. We call it the 5 C's, and maybe we stole pieces of it from somewhere. I don't even remember at this point. But here's the 5 C's. Now, the top 2, I put blue check marks next to those because those are sort of the table stakes that I was referring to. Those are things that I'm expecting everyone to be able to do when I'm interviewing them. So let me tell you what this means. Let's say that we're solving a profitability case, right? And we have a company that's looking, let's say it's a athletic shoe company, and they're looking to improve their profits, right? Okay. Well, profitability case, the conservative thing that I would expect you to know is that profit is the difference between revenue and cost. and that you'd have a framework that would include those things, right? That's conservative layer, knowing what profitability is about, having a baseline structure. Custom. Well, the custom layer means, well, you apply that lens to that industry. So if we're talking athletic shoes, revenues are going to be about the sales of the shoes themselves and maybe any other affiliated apparel and any other memberships or something that we have going on, right? And costs are going to be the labor costs to make them, the materials cost to make them, the shipping costs that we have, the retail store costs, right? That's kind of customizing the conservative layer to that industry and that situation. So those two things are really expected by the time you get to that interview and are getting ready to get an offer. So what's going to get you the offer, right? And that's those bottom three: creative, count, and calculate. So let me talk about these things. Creative would really be weaving in something interesting that you know from your experience, maybe that you've read in the news, that you've experienced yourself from your job, or just an interesting thought that you have, right? Let's say, you went to the custom layer and you were talking about costs, right? And you're talking about labor costs. Well, you could say, when you're introducing your framework and talking about the costs, you could add a creative twist and say, and one trend that I've seen in, with respect to labor is sustainable supply chains, or with respect to materials, let's say a sustainable supply chains, making sure that all of our materials are sourced in a sustainable and responsible way. So even though we're really looking to reduce costs, one thing we might want to consider, knowing about the industry trend, is can we weave in a sustainability aspect that we could use then to market downstream to our customers, maybe increase price, increased brand loyalty, right? Boom, now you've added in a true creative twist. And it might not even be a part of actually solving the case and getting the exact answer, but trust me, it's more important to have those true differentiating elements where you show that you're not just a cog, right? Everything's automated now, right? We have robots solving problems for us. We need people to bring in those creative thoughts, those custom elements. So that's the creative layer. Count. So within a case, there's a lot of information, right? You have all these costs, you got all these revenues, all these different pieces. There's so many directions you can go. Where are you going to go first? That's what the count layer is about. So after you've laid out all those components of your framework, that's where you would say, where I want to start first is with revenues. And, I'd like to start out looking at our shoe sales in this specific region. And the reason I want to do that is I have a hypothesis that region would be the fastest growing just based on, my knowledge of demographics within the United States. Boom. You notice what else I did right there? I worked in a why, right? So even if I'm wrong about my hypothesis, it's still important that I included my reasoning for wanting to go after certain information or go in a certain direction in the case. That's actually more important than whether I was correct in going that direction, okay? Because that allows the interviewer into my mind, into the way that I think, and they're going to be more comfortable with me as a candidate and trusting what I'm doing and trusting that what I do is a repeatable process, okay? And so count is really all about prioritizing, having an order that you're able to explain to the interviewer. And one way that I like to do this is I actually like to number it. So after I write out my framework, I'll number things. And actually, I'm going to jump over, let's see, to something that you can kind of visualize here, right? So we're talking about numbering things here. So you see on this page, I have profitability, I've got revenues and costs, price, all these different components, right? Let's say that I actually numbered, price is something I wanted to look at first, quantity is something I wanted to look at second, right? And then costs I wanted to look at this third and fourth, and I explained why I wanted to look at them in that order and then numbered them. That would give a nice structure. And so we call that the count, right? And the final one is called calculate, all right? So that was the fifth C on there. And what calculate is if there's a problem that we're trying to solve or an ultimate answer we're trying to get to, and there's some sort of mathematical component, one thing that you can really do is do a high-level summary of that ultimate problem you're trying to solve and path you're trying to take in a calculated way. And you can write it out in words, kind of at the bottom. So you could write out, okay, ultimately what we're going to do is we're going to take our price and we're going to multiply that by our quantity, and then we're going to subtract out our fixed cost minus variable, which is the number of items times the cost of those items. Once you subtract that out, we're going to get our overall profit, and then we're going to compare that profit to our client's goal to see whether or not they should take approach X or Y. And so you can talk out your calculation in words, and you can write it down in those words, and then something nice you can do as you move through the case is actually refer back to that original calculation and say, okay, well, it looks like we've gone through this revenue component, and you can kind of circle that and maybe write the end result number by it, right? And then you can go solve the next subcomponent and bring that answer back to your original calculation. And what that does is if you kind of get that broad, high-level calculation out of the way first, that tells the interviewer, hey, you know what? I know this candidate's on the right track. Even if they don't have the equation or the approach down perfectly, I have some faith that they're going to get there eventually, right? It gives the interviewer some peace of mind. And another thing that it does, which is really helpful to you as a candidate, is it gives the interviewer an opportunity to correct you early on. Getting corrected by an interviewer isn't the end of the world. Sometimes, in fact, it's even an indication that they're truly engaged in the case interview with you, all right? So that can be a good sign. And if you do this calculation component that I'm talking about, before you just jump right in and start solving all the little pieces, if you can lay out that high-level calculation, then that's something that allows them to guide you early on so that you don't go down a rabbit hole in the wrong direction and never emerge, all right? So that's calculate, that's the fifth component. And then this is just a visualization of kind of where you can implement some of these 5 C's, okay? So let me just kind of walk you through again a simulation. So now let's keep going with our athletic wear shoe company. Let's say that I, as the interviewer, have laid out the situation. We're looking to improve our profitability from 7 million to 10 million within the next year. And we need ideas on approaches for how to do that, okay? So that's the intro. One thing you can do right away is, ask some intelligent follow-up questions, okay? And even bring in some insights there before you start building in your framework, right? That's a great thing because you don't want to jump into building out your framework without truly understanding the situation, okay? And it's also a place where you can show some initial thoughts or insights that you might not end up putting into your framework because they're not perfectly relevant. That's still some interesting information that you want to share, okay? So that's a great place to do it right there. You could, that idea that I just shared about sustainability for materials, or an idea about, ethically treating employees, being another big trend, or the idea of the minimalist athletic wear becoming a big trend, right? Not all this big padded stuff, but kind of these minimalist shoes. Just sharing ideas, showing that you're kind of an interesting person, right there early on. So that's that first little insight circle. And the second one down there at the bottom, that's really kind of where we talked about that creative layer. So this just kind of gives you a visualization to the structure, right? That first layer of revenues and costs, right? And price and quantity. Again, that's the conservative layer, so you can visualize it. The next box is where you translate those conservative layers into the custom component for whatever the industry or situation is. So translating price into, the price of the shoes, quantity into the number of shoes, fixed into the fixed cost for manufacturing those, and variable into the variable costs, right? So that's where down below, beyond that layer, is where your insights come, all right? And a lot of times you only have a few minutes maybe to make your framework, and you're a little bit stressed or nervous, and so it takes a while to do it. Don't feel like you have to write all your insights down. Maybe you just put 1 or 2 words next to the area where you want to share it as sort of a trigger for yourself, so that when you're walking the interviewer through your framework, you remember to share that, right? And it's also something that they can take away, okay? All right, so I'm actually going to hop back. This is really just something to visualize those 5 C's. I'm going to hop back to something that I wanted to talk about as well. And this is applicable to a case. So we talked about the fit being a simulation for you being in different work environments. Well, the case is really the same thing. It's just a more intensive problem-solving type of version. And one thing that you're actually simulating is what we do all the time as consultants. We build deliverables and presentations for our clients. Clients bring us problems, we diagnose, we think through it with them, and we build a presentation, okay? And so what does that mean? Well, that means be organized and structured in the way that you're writing everything down. So, and give your interviewer something nice that they can take away and refer to later and say, hey, you know what? I remember this candidate. They did a great job. And I can recall everything that we walked through because it's all really nice, organized here for me. Okay. And so, they might end up with 4 or 5 different sheets that they come away with, right? And so, for example, one sheet might be the framework and the initial questions. The next sheet might be the first problem that you solved on revenue. The third one might be costs. And the fourth one might be your recommendations. And they can go through and say, yep, I see how they set it up. I see how they solve these 2 subcomponents, and I see their recommendations and how it all links together, right? And you might even number these like slides. Slide number 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's just like a nice little touch, and it's kind of working in that count component again, okay? And another tip is a lot of times we're in a hurry, right? We start getting numbers in cases. We want to start just doing calculations and solving problems right on whatever sheet we're on, whether that's the framework or some other sheet. I recommend just taking out one sheet, setting it aside, and letting that be your scrap calculation sheet. And then as you get answers, transfer that answer back to your framework or back to your large high-level calculation, right? So over here, let's say we had our framework with the price and the quantity, and we were solving a price problem, trying to figure it out. Don't do it all on the sheet. Go solve it somewhere and then bring it back and go ahead and write the final answer right in there. And then it's kind of like you're filling in each component to your calculation that you're driving towards. Okay. Okay. And sometimes there will sort of be separate brainstorming questions that come up where they say, you know what? Can you just give me your estimate for what you think the market size would be in Southern California if we were to expand down there? I mean, how would you go about doing that estimate? Let's say they just asked you off the cuff, and this happens. A lot of times they'll throw a curveball brainstorming question in there. That's an opportunity where you go ahead and pull out a new sheet, write down the question that says market sizing for Southern California, and then you go through in a structured way and kind of prioritize a few steps. I'd say, the first thing I'd do is I'd look at, some of the census. I'd look at some trends, and then I'd anticipate kind of where it's going to be. And then I would look at, the demographics for that area and what the comparable benchmarks are for those demographics in other locations, right? Boom, step 1, 2, 3, 4, right? You write that down, you got a nice clean brainstorming sheet, for example, right? So there's another thing that you want to consider. This also helps you to stay organized because you can get lost in all this information. If you have nice, clean, separate sheets, again, it's better to have maybe 1 or 2 more than just cram everything onto one, all right? Okay. So early on, I kind of gave a teaser that the case is really about fit. Okay. So this is a chance for you to have a really positive interaction with the interviewer. It's not a chance for you to get the perfect answer on the case. Lots of people are going to get the right answer on the case. If they ask kind of the right questions, they're given the correct information by the interviewer, and then, you go ahead and you put the pieces together and you get, that they should hire 400 people for this new area, and that's the answer. Great. Okay. That's not what it's all about. Again, this is a chance for you to simulate what you are like to work with. So one thing that you can do is actually co-solve the case as though your colleagues working together. Now, sometimes you're given explicit instructions to, act like they're the client and you're the consultant, and whatever. But ultimately, even with our clients, we're co-solving problems together. And our clients generally like us and like our outcome better if they feel like they were engaged in the process. So some of the things you can do, tactically to implement that are, instead of sitting directly across from the interviewer, maybe you go to one of the side edges of the table. So you're sort of sitting, kitty corner to them. That's a great way to kind of physically position yourself to be co-solving the case. It also makes it easier when you're showing them your framework or information that you're writing down. Rather than flipping it 180 degrees, you're just turning it 90 degrees and kind of showing it to them, right? And I'm sort of talking about another example, right? Don't just write things down and keep it to yourself. Turn the paper to them, point at the different things that you're talking about. Let them really visualize what you're going through, right? And you can kind of even say, does this make sense to you? Is where we're headed kind of what you were anticipating, right? And these are common things that we say to our clients as well, right? Like, here's what I'm thinking. Does that make sense, right? And that gives them an opportunity to maybe try to understand more if they didn't really know where you're headed, to correct you if you're headed down the wrong path, right? And to really engage with you, to kind of get a sense for, hey, you know what? I like working with this person. They don't pretend like they've got everything figured out. They're clearly very smart and structured, but they're also making sure that I'm engaged and involving me in this, right? And that also helps them stay awake during the interview as well. The other thing is be legitimately intrigued, right? And one thing you can do, don't do it in too rehearsed of a way, is actually say, oh, you know what? That's interesting. This is kind of cool, and if you seem really intrigued by the case and interested in solving it, that's going to give the interviewer a sense of energy. That's going to up their energy and engagement with you, right? So just try to show that you're really interested in tackling this problem with them. Sometimes we've got to fake it with our clients. It's kind of an annoying problem to solve, but we have to show that we're really excited to work with them on it and solve that problem. So if you can show that type of skill through the case, that's an extra element in your favor. And then be comfortable and make it fun, okay? Again, of course you want to try to be smart and get the right answers, but it's probably more important that the interviewer come away saying, you know what, I enjoyed that experience with Jim or Sally, right? And they'll remember you. It's better to be memorable and leave them with a positive energy and get 85% of the case right than get 99% of it right and have them say, you know what, that person solved it, but that was just boring, and I'm, not really excited to talk to the next person, and this is just a long day, right? Try to be comfortable and have fun, and again, you don't have to crack jokes, but you can actually have a little bit of fun with them. Ask them some questions, or if there's an interesting fact, you can kind of point that out, right? If a calculation is kind of leading to something ridiculous, you can say, well, that's really strange. I wouldn't think that we'd make, 100 billion shoes just for this population. Sometimes the cases have funny elements worked in that don't really make sense, and the interviewers think that's interesting if you point things out. So, try to be memorable. Try to have fun with them. All right. So that's what I mean when I say the case is actually about fit. Everyone thinks it's about being structured, about memorizing dozens of different frameworks, so they've got it all ready to go and they can move through quickly and efficiently. I'm telling you guys, that is table stakes by the end of the day. If you're really engaging to interact with, that's going to count for a lot more than you think. Okay. So we ended with about 12 minutes left for questions. So I think that's plenty of time. I know we covered a lot and I went through kind of quickly, so hopefully we've got a few questions here that we can get through.
Cool. I'm going to come back in here. Can everybody hear me? Or at least Austin, can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Good. I think the others should be muted so we don't get that interference. So as I mentioned in the beginning, thank you very much, Austin, first of all. That was great. To everybody who's on the call, I'm going to run through, I came up with some questions of my own, and also we've got those that were submitted before this began. But I'm sure you guys are filled with questions after hearing all of that. So please use the chat box and just put your name, school, and your question, and I will make sure to present that to Austin in the order that they appear. But to kick things off, one of the things that you spoke about, especially in that first half, is it's engaging some of these really big questions around, why am I interested in something like consulting, this field that most likely, especially as a first or a second year student, even a junior, might not know, in any kind of concrete way what that actually means. So why am I interested in this field or in this realm of work? Why work at this particular company? And even bigger than that, how do I communicate a sincere story about myself, and through that kind of connect in a human way and make light of a situation? How do you I think there's a lot of questions in there that really at base come down to having the time as an individual to kind of reflect and to make sense of, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I interested in these fields? Why do I want to work in this context with these people in this place? And I know for a lot of students, I hear this all the time. I remember it, as a student a few years ago, it can be really difficult to find that space, especially on a busy college campus in which everybody seems to be kind of running around constantly, chasing lots of things. And so I'm curious, even just from your own personal perspective, either at undergrad or at the MBA level, which I'm sure is also very kind of fast-paced and chaotic, how did you make time to come up with some of those solid answers and to kind of grow into yourself so that you could answer those questions confidently and not feel like you're making things up?
Yeah, and there's a lot of ways to go about doing that, but I kind of circle back to making sure that they are that your stories are authentic experiences. First of all, right? You don't want to be embellishing anything, right? And then I start out by coming up with about 10 of them, and when I come up with those 10, I like to make sure that there's a mix of different experiences. So one of the keys for me is making sure that it's not all from one job or one class or whatever. I think it's great if you really have a mix of both things that you're personally passionate about and then more professional oriented accomplishments. And so that diversity within the set of questions that you come up with is step number one. Okay. And again, start out with maybe about 10. And that's actually kind of a lot. So what you'd want to do is pare that 10 down to about 5 or 6 really good ones. And it's kind of difficult, but you actually want to tell those stories to people that you trust, right? And so let's say that maybe you have 2 stories from each category. So you got a total of 10. You got maybe 4 different categories: school, work, personal volunteer work that you're involved with, and some other passionate area or hobby or something, right? For example, or maybe 2 different jobs. So you've got a few categories, and then tell the 2 stories you have from each of those to some colleagues and see which ones really resonate with them, and ask them to share like what components engage them and why, and try to apply that to your other stories and use that to help pare those down. And then take advantage of the resources that you have on campus too, because they've heard millions of these stories. They know which ones are good, and they'll also help you get those stories into the context, action, result format. Context meaning you set it up, you draw them in. Action showing things that you personally did to impact that situation, and then result meaning what was the outcome of those actions that you took. Hopefully that's kind of helping to answer the question.
Yeah, absolutely. So it almost sounds like in going through that journey of coming up with your story or being able to begin articulating your own purpose, it makes sense not to dive right into the deep end of what is my life's purpose, which of course is a really intimidating question, but instead to think through what are concrete stories that stick out to me as being significant. And then once you've assembled a few of them, maybe that means sharing it with a career coach on campus or with friends, and beginning to kind of assemble how do these stories come together into some narrative that actually does communicate who I am in a way that's perfectly authentic, even if it's not what you'd immediately think is what your interviewer is looking to hear.
Yeah. So, to your other point about the purpose statement, I think just thinking about if it's consulting, right? If it's just general strategy consulting, think about things you're passionate about in your life. Think about the problems that you want to solve. So that's a good starting point. What are the things out there in the world that you love or that you hate and you want to change, right? Because those are things that are going to help make your purpose statement actually resonate with somebody, because they'll be able to tell that you really do care about that. and you really want to make a difference. And you're going to have a fastball within the firm, right? It's like, I know that Sally is going to be the go-to person for making cars digitalized or something like that, or, driverless cars, a safe thing. That's something that, their resume says they're passionate about, and I can really see in their story that is who they are and what they want to do. It's better if they can kind of look at you in their mind and be able to envision, what your fastball is and who you are and what you're all about, than if, they're just remembering a few companies you work for and trying to remember a few accomplishments. That's why the purpose statement is really important, because it makes you more memorable. It makes their interaction with you more long-lasting. And at the end of the day, when they're sifting through dozens, that's a real differentiator.
Yeah, very cool. So again, just a reminder, people, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. You should all have that in the center of your console, actually one to the left, the second from the left. So one question that was submitted ahead of time by Kevin Lynn at Yale, and there was a few pieces, but one I thought was very relevant to what you just spoke about, which is what do you think are the top mistakes that candidates make? So you've spoken about a few of them, but even from your own experience, what are kind of some ticks or some common pitfalls that you see really often from students?
Yeah, sure. Well, I would say, one of the biggest pitfalls is just, kind of having stories that you're making up, right? And kind of starting down a certain path with that story where the interviewer then asks a follow-up question. If it's not a real, honest story, or you're embellishing a little bit, then, those follow-up questions can kind of get you in a little bit of trouble or be challenging to have a good answer to. One of the other pitfalls is going on for like 8-9 minutes on just one story. Again, the interviewers get really frustrated with this. They want to be able to ask 4 or 5 different questions during a fin interview because, again, they're trying to simulate getting to know you, and they have 4 or 5 in mind. And if you only allow them to get to 2 of those, they're going to be kind of frustrated and feel like they don't have a good sense for who you are. So, again, be concise and structured in the way that you answer these questions. Not overly rehearsed, but just concise enough that you can show, what the situation was, what you did, and what that good result was, and how it all links together, right? So that's another kind of common pitfall. And I'm going to leave out things like dressing unprofessionally or, not having good hygiene. Again, those are common things that you want to make sure that you cover. So that's within the fit, and then within the case, I think people being too rigid in their application of case frameworks that they've memorized. So if they've decided to themselves that it's a profitability case and they're forcing a certain framework on the situation that doesn't really apply, that's pretty frustrating, because then I know I'm going to have to give them a lot of coaching to circle them back to the right thing. And it shows me that they weren't really listening to the question that was being asked. So making sure you understand the goal of the case, what the client is trying to do, whether that's, increase profits or whatever. So really try to gain clarity in the goal that the client's trying to achieve and understand the components of it, because that's going to set you on the right path. Don't be too rigid in applying what you think is the right structure. So hopefully those are some tips.
Good. So 2 more that were just submitted. One is actually echoing. I'm sorry if I mispronounced this. Boladi or Bolad from Carnegie Mellon asked, how do you handle the question, what other firms did you apply to? And more specifically, why is it that employers ask this question in the first place? What are they looking for?
Yeah, well, I can tell you what they're looking for. I ask this one a lot, and I don't say firms, I say companies. A lot of times I want to see if people are truly interested in consulting, or if they're applying to a bunch of industry companies as well, right? So if they're telling me, what's work-life balance like in consulting, and I'm applying to a bunch of industry companies, well, that tells me that I don't know if you're really authentically interested in consulting, or if it's just one of many things that you're exploring. And it tells me, well, you might get burned out quick, or you might not like it, and you might want to leave. And so do I want to hire someone and invest a lot of energy in them if consulting isn't really their purpose and their passion, right? So that's probably one of the biggest reasons. If you name some of the company's competitors, that's fine. So if I'm interviewing with EY and And I say, well, I'm looking at firms that really align with the passion and what I want to do and are going to give me those opportunities. And so, some of the firms who are on campus include EY, PwC, and Deloitte. Each one of them has a health and strategy focus area, and that's really what I want to do. And so the key to answering that question, which I just sort of gave an example of how to answer it, is make sure that your answer aligns with your purpose. Okay, that's why having a purpose statement is key, because it kind of is that underlying component to all your answers. And so you can name those companies as long as it's consistent and it aligns with what you want to do. They're not going to be offended that you're not dedicated to them. We've all been in your shoes. I tell candidates that I'm interviewing, hey, yeah, I interviewed with Deloitte. They were a great place, and if you end up there, that's awesome. I'll be really excited for you. Here's why I like EY and why I'm here, and I hope you join us, right? We don't like to treat everyone like they're the enemy. We get a lot of great people from other firms as well, so don't worry about that. Just make sure that your answer is consistent with the industry that you're interviewing with and your passion and purpose.
Cool. So let's do one more if you have the time.
Absolutely.
From Victor Alfonso at Fordham University. So he's curious, how would you estimate it's really a question about how much practice around case interviews specifically do you see successful candidates doing? And then as an addendum to that, what would you recommend in terms of resources or ways to practice, whether that's websites or books or just, like actual techniques, whether it's doing it with friends, et cetera, that you found to be most helpful?
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. So let's take that one piece at a time. I'll start with the number of cases that you'd want to practice. And that's a good question. So the most successful range that I've seen in terms of practicing would be about 20 to 25 before you do an interview. The people who do 50 or 60 before they interview can actually get a little bit over-rehearsed in the cases and kind of overdo it. I'm not going to say it's a hard and fast rule, but that's kind of that number where you hit your stride, but you don't feel like you've seen and memorized every type of case, because then you kind of feel like you have these canned frameworks that you can just lay on top of any question, and you lose that ability to be creative and custom, which I talked about earlier. So again, think about the 20 to 25 range as a good mark for seeing enough variety, getting enough repetition so you have that muscle memory, but not overdoing it. Resources, my personal favorite, but again, it's been a few years for me. I liked Victor Chang. I really liked his audio examples of going through a case, where he would kind of pause sometimes. He would walk through the opening. He would walk through the framework. He would walk through the problem solving. He was a little bit more rigid than I would like you to be. But again, he's giving you the basics and the table stakes. He's not trying to give you all the differentiators. His book is good. His audio recordings, if you can get a hold of them, are kind of more helpful because you can hear what it's like and what the flow is like. And then finally, practicing with friends is good. But it's very, very important to practice with people who are actually good at cases. You'll learn 5 times as much by doing just a handful of cases with people who've done it than doing dozens with your friends who are learning at the same time as you. So most schools have people who have already spent time at companies. They're a year or two ahead of you. At University of Michigan, we call them peer coaches, and I used those coaches a lot, and then I became a coach later. And my practice with the coaches was way more beneficial to me. And then I would just say, make sure you're practicing with more than one other person or coach, because each one will give you a different type of tip. So maybe do 2 or 3 cases with one, allow them to give you some tips, and then see your progression. And then maybe make sure you do a couple with another coach, because each one might have a different focus, whether it's industry like finance or whether it's their perspective on different strategies to help you improve. So that's what I'd say would really help you get prepared.
Perfect. Well, that wraps it up. Thank you, Austin, for such a thoughtful presentation. For everybody on the call, we will share out the recording of this, and it'll also be available on the Knowledge Center at some point in the near future. And I'm, if you have questions moving forward, please feel free to reach out. You were also shared with Austin's LinkedIn, so that's something that you can reach out if that's what you feel comfortable doing. Austin, I'm sure, is okay with that. But stay tuned for more events. We'll have many different kinds covering lots of different topics over the coming months. So keep an eye out for what's going on. And like I said before, we will be beginning our application or opening up our applications again starting in January. And depending where you were in the process last spring, we'll be following up with you specifically. So nothing to worry about for the moment. Just good luck with your midterms and your campus recruiting processes, and we'll be in touch. Have a good night, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, Austin.